What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me today are two of my great co-hosts. Unfortunately, we can't have our last ones with Fede Perez here, who is, had quite a busy schedule, but at least he's happy that he's getting his vaccine soon. So best wishes to him that he is getting that shot. But I'm happy to have here Ralph, Hannah, and Maria Britos. And guys, it is the summer here. Everything's been packed up. I think everyone's talking about this case of football coming home and all this talk of a Super Clásico in the Copa America. We got to talk about what's going on in a few weeks, man. The league's about to start soon. The Clausura, Libertadores is back. Sudamericana is back. We got women's game. And obviously, we do have to mention about these guys as well as we obviously review their participation in the Copa America. So we'll get all into that, guys, and talk about it. But let me introduce my two great co-hosts. Let's go to someone who maybe might be feeling a little bit nervous about a little over 24 hours before their first major final in 55 years. Ralph, Hannah, is it coming home? How are you feeling now, basically, after all this drama that's been going on this summer?
Yeah, this is the calm before the storm. I don't know. I'm still not decided what to do with myself tomorrow because so far I think I've watched every game at home. So maybe I need to stay at home to keep kind of what's the word, like keep the good luck charm going with England. I don't know. I'm unsure what to do.
Don't do a Mufa. Don't do a Mufa.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be a Mufa. So I mean, unfamiliar territory, having never been in a final before. So let's see. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, I mean, like you were saying, there's lots of football. It's kind of, it never stops. Somebody asked me the other day, when does the football stop? It never stops. There's always something. So we're rolling like straight into Libertadores next week, which we're going to talk about Sudamericana as well. But we've just come off, the Copa America hasn't even finished as we're going to, as we're recording this. It's at the finals tonight. So it's kind of non-stop at the moment.
Absolutely. It's been going nonstop, and we'll go straight into the other section of Miami, Maria Britos. We haven't had her actually in quite some time, but I'm sure as everyone is continuing to focusing on what's been going on in Europe and South America, we do have to talk about what's going on with Paraguay, which, depending on which side of the spectrum you are about them, it's a bit indifferent, but I think a lot can be made following their participation in this Copa America, Maria.
Well, good morning, guys. It's been a while for me. I'm happy that I'm back. But yeah, it was a crazy tournament for Paraguay. They did not make it, unfortunately, further than what we saw. But I think my prediction was that they wouldn't make it past the group stage. I think. But at least they made it. I did it on purpose. It was reverse psychology. But I'm happy that they had a good participation. They showed a lot of good things that we were looking for. The first game that we saw from them, the one that I was able to talk to you guys about, was a very, for the first game, it was great, because they showed everything that we needed them to do, the will, the ganas, everything that we had been talking about, they proved us wrong. And I'm very happy for the participation, although they didn't make it further too far, but it is what it is. Now the focus is on the World Cup.
Absolutely. That is the main focus now heading into World Cup qualification. And we're going to go into what we saw from Paraguay. Obviously, they did finish in third place in the group stage. In order, a win against Bolivia, a loss against Argentina, 1-0 loss to Argentina, 3-1 win over Bolivia, a 2-0 win over Chile, and then a 1-0 loss to Uruguay before going into the quarterfinals in a dramatic, probably the most entertaining game of the Copa America so far, a 3-3 draw against Peru, only to lose on penalties, which a game that we saw everything. 10 men on both sides of the field. Obviously, a last-minute equalizer from Avalos, and just I think what we saw from this, and I'll go to Ralph on you to begin our discussion. I think there is still that kind of debate about Berizzo's using his best team, because we still haven't seen it. We still haven't seen a consistent starting lineup. It keeps continuing to chop and change. And I think even though we lost the last one on penalties, obviously, I think we saw a performance that, Paraguay would not want to give up, and they continue to fight on even when they were conceding. They kept going, and they scored the equalizers. And I think it paints a big picture of what is to come. Many people have been calling for Berizzo's head because of the poor showing in the Copa America. I personally don't believe that it's something that you have to do in the middle of a World Cup qualification where, you're still technically in a spot to qualify. So, but at the same time, I think we are now starting to see a formula that works, and obviously players that have really stood out that are basically, in my opinion, should be undisputed starters for the World Cup qualifiers.
Yeah, the question about the players is interesting, and the undisputed starters, because I agree as well. I think when we talked in the preview, we did hope that Berizzo would maybe, use this to experiment a bit and try and start to find some ideas and some options at work. And he definitely did that. I mean, we saw, for example, Carlos Gonzalez finally getting some starts, and I thought he played really well up front. Even though you mentioned Avalos does get the equalizer in the Peru game, I did think on balance that Gonzalez was a better option. So the hope, I guess, is that maybe Berizzo keeps with that. But to your point also, Roberto, he does chop and change a lot, and he doesn't seem to have a consistent team. And you can tell what he's trying to do in a way. What he's trying to do is, knowing that you can never guarantee that you will always have the same team in international football. You don't know what's going to happen with injuries, especially now with COVID as well, that can affect team selections. He's trying to get enough players that he can just pull them in and out of a formation or a system that he likes, which has some merit in a way. But I think at some point you have to start boiling this down to maybe a group of 16, 17 players. We know it won't always be 11. But yeah, I think a few positives, if let's go to the positives first for sure. But I think a few positives was Gustavo Gomez has been excellent. He was actually very good coming into it with the World Cup qualifiers, the last two. If you remember, Gomez is the best central defender Paraguay has. He's the captain. He was struggling a bit in the early World Cup qualifiers towards the end of last year. But I think he's been much better, and he's kind of really cemented that place. And that, I think that gives Paraguay, a lot more stability when you have your captain performing at the level, he can. I talked about Carlos Gonzalez, who I think as a number 9 offers a lot more kind of mobility and just kind of traditional hold-up play than Avalos does. So I think he's a useful player. And I think what we saw with having a player like him who's more physical, you can't try and play without a 9 and play with a false 9 like he was doing in some of the qualifiers, like trying to have Angel Romero as the main target man. Angel Romero can play off him, sure, so can Almiron, but I think you want to have that kind of reference point in attack. And then I think the last thing was when he stopped playing Gaston Jimenez for a lot of games, which is a player that he had kind of persisted with. But I think we saw Paraguay was actually a bit better and more creative without him. Paraguay created much more chances in this Copa America, kind of on average per game, compared to what they were doing in the World Cup qualifiers. I mean, you saw they scored 3 goals against Peru, they scored 3 goals against Bolivia, they got 2 against Chile. Even though they struggled a bit in the Argentina-Uruguay games, they were much more, especially the Argentina game, I thought they were much more kind of creative or looking to play football more than what we saw in that World Cup qualifier when they hardly attacked. They just had one counter-attack with Almiron. So I think there's some positives there that he's starting to get a bit more of that balance right and finding some of those plays.
Definitely. But now looking into these type of games, obviously the ones where, there isn't any failure to go through, because, we're going straight up over a year until the World Cup starts in Qatar. The rest of the Paraguay games that they will play are all going to be World Cup qualifiers. So, I think what we also saw as well, and Maria, I'll go to you on this one because you were watching it in the Bolivia game. That we saw a lot of young talent come in as well. And Ciso, the 17-year-old Julio Enciso, comes in, so it shows that Berizzo has a ton of options, and I think that's important now heading into these qualifiers where obviously you can have a ton of games being packed up. Obviously, like Ralph said, you don't know what's going to happen in international football because you can have injuries now with COVID. Players can go out, so I think what is useful is not only the options that he has to his disposal, but how they're able to demonstrate it. And we saw that with the likes of obviously Andre Romero stepping up. We saw players like Kaku Romero, who has had quite a good record actually when you think about it. I think he's averaged an assist or a goal in all the games that he's played on the national team on the Berizzo. So it looks as if though there is something that works, but at the same time, there's always going to be that kind of negative factor of wanting to win, wanting to go more. Because I think that's how, in a game or industry like this where results are truly important, Berizzo can't fail at this, but at the same time, you got to keep with him until the end, even if it does go badly.
Absolutely. At this point, we're too far into the game to change coaches, if that's what you mean, Roberto. But I agree with what Ralph was saying about the fact that he was looking for something set, but at the same time he was changing it up all the time, which could be good and could be bad. But in this case, he already has had enough games under his belt that he should have been able to concrete a group of starting 11s that should make the job, get the job done. But like you said, Roberto, unfortunately, sometimes things happen out of our control or out of their control, and we have Almiron that got hurt, and now he's out for indefinitely. The fact that he also experimented with young players and new players not only gives him a chance to see what they could do, but also gives these players a chance to show what they actually can do. We also don't want to be stuck with one group of players and not give not do a little bit of experimenting, because at the end of the day, we need players to come in after the players that can't come in, like Almiron, for example. But other than that, I wanted to mention the fact that a lot of people talked not so good about the Gabriel Avalos, and I was impressed with his performance. I thought that he did very well for his first time in the national team. And I think he had the tying goal against Peru, which is ridiculous. It was great. I was watching it and I was screaming at the top of my lungs. But I was very happy with his performance, and I think that he's someone that could continue to come into the games. I wouldn't say he's a key to the team, but he definitely puts in a lot of he definitely helps a lot of in the team, especially making plays. He's in the middle. He's the number 9, so he's there always waiting. When someone passes him the ball, he's right there, and he can just get like a good goal, and like the one that we saw against Peru. But I think that Berizzo did fairly well with everything, considering the fact all the players that he had to choose from. I think he did very well, and I'm not upset with him at all.
Well, it's going to be quite interesting, and Rob, I'll go to you on this one to close. I think what we saw from the players after the tournament ended, a lot of them speaking to the media about that gain of trust, the fact that and Miggy, for example, I think had the more elaborate conversation with the media, is about saying that he wanted to understand that a process like this doesn't happen overnight, and now the fact that they or him himself are starting to have a coach or manager that is starting to finally realize a style of play that works. You made an interesting quote saying that, if you don't run, you can't win games, where it's debatable. I think that's a debatable topic to go to, depending on what team you really follow or what league you follow. But he does bring up a good point. And I think when you see players like that stepping out, Gomez also spoke about the same thing as well. So it kind of feels as if, though, that confidence on the manager is truly important, that kind of unity for these type of games that are about to come from the World Cup qualifiers.
Yeah, I think the Almiron comments obviously were very inflammatory here in the Paraguayan media, because he kind of not disrespected a bit maybe some of the previous players, former players who maybe weren't as happy because they've already gone to the World Cups and they've done it, whereas this team have to get there. But I think what we saw with him, also with Gustavo Gomez, where him, even though he was sent off, which I thought unfairly against Peru, but his kind of passion. I mean, this team do start to believe in themselves, I think, a bit more, and they are showing some of that kind of leadership qualities that maybe they'd been missing, because it was a very young team, but now a lot of these guys are kind of coming into about 27, 28, so they're starting to take on those roles. And one of the positives, I think, you talk about style of play, but what Paraguay needed and what they were missing was something very basic, which was scoring from set pieces, which they actually managed in the Copa America after not having done it, I think, during the whole Berizzo era. They just weren't, they weren't making things happen really from corners or free kicks. So having that option in those tight games is also very important, and because it's not you're always going to be able to break down teams, especially when you have to go to away games in the qualifiers. There's some really difficult venues where you have to try and pick up points at altitude or at extreme heat, that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of the positive as well, and definitely this is a style and this is a transition, and there's no point cutting it at this point, because what a lot of people focus on, the kind of, they're not winning many games, okay, but they're still actually in the position to qualify as it stands. It's not like we're Peru, who went into Peru, for example, went into this doing really badly in the World Cup qualifiers, and they've stuck with Gareca, and Gareca's taken them to the semi-finals, and they've played some really good football, and he's actually found a couple of solutions, just using Peru as an example, and they're probably going into the World Cup qualifiers thinking, hey, we've still got a chance, and they're a few points behind Paraguay. Paraguay is actually in a position where they can qualify. It's kind of all to play for, to fight for. So the idea of getting rid of the coach wouldn't make any sense, and I don't think that's on the radar for the Paraguayan FA either. I mean, it's something you hear from some journalists, from fans, but I don't think it's something you're hearing from actually inside the organization, because this is kind of basically the plan was, use this Copa America to experiment. They've won a couple of games against the kind of teams they would hope to beat. So it's kind of all to play for, I think. And yeah, the questions now, that there's a bit about injuries. Let's hope Almiron, I think it should only be a month or so. So let's hope he can get back for the next round of qualifiers. Unfortunately, Antonio Barreiro is out for pretty much 6 to 9 months. He actually had ACL surgery yesterday, so he picked up that injury in the Copa America. But other than that, yeah, if players can keep fit, start getting regular game time, like Arzamendia has just signed for Cadiz in Spain. So we actually have him playing La Liga instead of in Paraguay. That's a big move. Let's hope Balbuena starts playing a bit more he's just moved to Dynamo Moscow. So, if we're building up just in time, I think, to really have a good run at this in the end of the World Cup qualifiers, and if they go to the World Cup, who can, it doesn't matter how they get there or who they go, then or what style of play they use. If they get there, then I think everybody's behind Berizzo.
That's the thing, really. I think it's just focusing on that, and also to mention, Omar Delete possibly going to Valencia, so another player that is getting a lot of a part of this team that are getting moves and getting consistent playing time for their clubs. I think that's really it. I think that's something that has to be shown. Again, you're not going to convince an entire population of fans overnight, even though, like you said, Maria, it's been now, 25 games in charge. You think that you would have a style of play, but it happens. Paraguay don't have the capacity or the talent of a Brazil and Argentina to just switch it like that. But I think it's all just a case of how they get there, get the results that they need, and just go from there. Because I think that's all that matters right now in such a results-based sport. But yeah, no, I mean, I would say that it was a decent Copa America. Just to close it off, I think it was a decent one. A lot of things to obviously focus on, to fix, and go from there. I think that's really what I think the most important things that you see these group of players really feeling confident about themselves, really wanting to make that objective to make the World Cup after so many years out. And so we just have to feel confident in them to see what they can do on the pitch. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that as the qualifiers begin in about a few. Wait, Maria, yeah, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say that I think one of the biggest things that this team can take from this Copa America is the confidence that they gained from making it all the way to this stage, and now going into the World Cup. That's very important. I always talk about this, and I always say that they need to show more courage and more ganas, more will. And this is what we saw, and this is what I think that they took from this tournament, and I'm happy because that's very important in the team.
I think the Peru game showed that they don't give up, and I think it showed that even against the bigger opponents that they are willing to make the difficult very difficult. So yeah, we'll definitely have to wait and see what happens in these next few games. But let's switch gears to the club game right now as we focus on the end of international football for Paraguay, and we focus now strictly on the international game in club seasons. We got the Libertadores coming back, but also we got the Sudamericana. We want to mention that real quick as well, guys, that the Copa Sudamericana is also beginning in the next few days. Obviously, Libertad are in it as well. They made a few good transfers, actually, if you mention it. They got the likes of Marcelo Diaz, Camilo Maidada, and Lorenzo Merjarejo heading into this game against Junior of Colombia. They travel to Barranquilla on the 14th, and it's a tough one. It's definitely a tough tie when you look at it, but ultimately, I think Libertad are really straightening up to really go and go far in this tournament, and obviously the money that's been made after winning the league, and obviously with this kind of galactico style of Paraguay at the moment, they're going for it. They're really going for it, and so they're definitely going to be an interesting tie to see. But now heading into the round of 16 in the Copa Libertadores, both our teams, Cerro Porteño and Olimpia, will be facing off Brazilian teams this week. Cerro Porteño will be hosting Fluminense at La Nueva Olla, and Olimpia will be hosting Internacional over there in Para Uno. Ralph, I want to go to you on this one because as we saw before when the ties were being made, there were two difficult opponents. Obviously, Olimpia have faced Inter before. They know what they're like, so they know that kind of experience. But for Cerro's case, and they made some changes there. They've gotten some pieces to fix those that are leaving or been injured or whatnot. But again, I think you brought this up in one of your tweets or in a WhatsApp group. Cerro Porteño have never beaten a Brazilian team in this type of two-legged tie. So history is not on their side for this one.
Yeah, it's a huge task for Cerro. Yeah, that's right. They've never beaten Brazilians over two legs, to advance. This is the first time they're going to play Fluminense in the Libertadores, but they had an infamous tie with them in the Sudamericana semifinals in 2009, which basically ends, if anybody wants to look it up on YouTube afterwards, it ends in this kind of mass brawl and, players... Fred, who was at Fluminense at the time, said that the Cerro players should go to jail, like all this kind of stuff. It was your classic, I would say classic Libertadores, but it was in the Sudamericana. And it's interesting to think that Fred was playing. He's obviously gone to Europe. He's now back at Fluminense. But it looks like he won't travel to Asuncion. He got injured because Fluminense have been playing games this whole time. The Brasileirão didn't stop for international football. So since Cerro's last game, the last game of the Clausura, and what's going to be Tuesday's match in the Libertadores, Fluminense will have played 13 times, whereas Cerro haven't played at all. So that's quite interesting in a feeling that is that an advantage? Maybe because Flu will have had, lots of players together, or is it a disadvantage that Cerro are a bit more rested and have really just been focusing on this game, at least for the last, I think, week to 10 days since Chiquiasis had the team back. A couple of things for Cerro that they are missing, of course. Arcemendia, we just mentioned, he's been transferred, so they're going to probably have to put in Vargas or somebody at left back. And then also Lucena came back from the Copa America injured, which I think is a real big blow, because we always talk about that Cerro midfielder of Villasanti and Pica Lucena. Well, Lucena's out. They did sign a midfielder who can play in the middle, which is Carrascal. Carrascal is a Colombian midfielder who played against Cerro for América de Cali, and he impressed, and they've picked him up. And just maybe an important note on this is nobody gets cut-tied, so even though he's played Libertadores for América de Cali, he's still eligible for the knockout rounds, because you kind of clean the list at this stage of the tournament, and you can re-register everybody for the knockout stages. So all these signings that Cerro are making, even though it's mid-season, and the same for all the other teams, they will be eligible to play in the knockout rounds of the Libertadores or the Sudamericano in the case of Libertad. But yeah, I think for Cerro, it's good that Fred's not there. Also, by the way, I think they have a really good central defender, Fluminense Nino, who's actually with the Olympic squad with Brazil, so that kind of helps them that he's missing. I think Raul Boadilla looks like he's going to be injured as well, because if you remember the Paraguayan striker Boadilla, he's at Fluminense. He looks to be injured as well. So I mean, they're coming not with a full team, but then they do have someone like Kaiki, the teenage sensation who's been signed by Manchester City, and he's just playing. He's going to go to Man City, I think. Is it next year? Maybe, I don't know. But he's already signed the pre-contract, so that's a very exciting left-footed winger. But he often plays on the right. I mean, it's always a tough game against these Brazilians. I think for Chiquias and for Cerro, it's can they come away with a clean sheet and hopefully nick one goal and have that 1-0 win to then try and take it to Brazil. But I think it's a very tough task, even with those players that Flu are missing.
Absolutely. It's going to be a really tough task. And that's the thing of trying to get a result, to take to Brazil. And Maria, I want to go to you on this one, because for Olympia's case, that's the same thing as well. Obviously, I think Olympia have to understand that heading into this game, they're trying to get the strongest team necessary. Obviously, I think Roque is going to be back in this one. Willy Camacho actually is back, a really influential player for Olympia for quite some time. But that's the thing, really, kind of in the same boat as Cedro, is that they need to get that result over there in Parauno in order to set themselves up. And we saw that kind of the way that they, that's in a way of Paraguay, like they always find a way to never give up and to try to get the results necessary. We saw that in the way that they qualified out of the group stage to go into the round of 16. So they kind of need that now in a game like this, which is definitely much more tighter than one would expect.
Oh, definitely. I think they're coming. I think they understand that situation that they're in, and now that they're going to face in the Libertadores, that they're going to face an opponent that they've already had pretty much a bad experience with. They're getting everything ready that they can. They're doing a lot of signings. I think the latest one that they signed, Edgardo Ortuza, is one of the players that Orteman wants to focus on and be able to use as an option, because we had players like you said, Roberto, that are not gonna that didn't make it into the last Libertadores, and they were missing, and now I think Orteman wants to switch, wants to use this new signing with replacing Richard Ortiz. That's what I was reading. I was trying to remember who it was. But they're doing a lot of signings, and I think they want to put a good foot into this competition again, because they're very close to not making it into the stage of the Libertadores, and then coming out with the Clausura as well. they want to win it this time and have a better performance than they did last time, because last time it was they started off as we talked about it last season. They started off very well, but then they ended up, not doing well and not convincing any of the Olimpistas. And I think with the new with Orteman now, he has a lot to prove. Like I've been saying, he needs to make sure that Olympia gets good wins and as many wins as he can possible. Because if not, I don't see his future in the team for too long. But let's hope for the best. I think Olympia can do it. They're having a lot of changes made. We have Santa Cruz coming back, which is a great thing. He's one of the players that saves Olympia at the end. He's one of those players, and he's also one that helps the team, with their will and with being more courageous. And I think that's something important, like I've been saying. But let's see how they do.
Also, I mean, Delis Gonzalez is back from injury. I think so. Roque being back from injury is good, but Delis Gonzalez only really came in towards the end, I think, of the Clausura. Now he's actually got a preseason behind him, which is good. And I think to Maria's point, it's definitely Ottoman. His problem was that midfield. He couldn't get it to work with Rojas and Ortiz. And then I think Santa Cruz started playing towards the end of the season. But he was finding that difficult. So I think Osusa is one of those players that's kind of dependable. He's always impressed at local level. So I think that's why he's made that signing. And then bringing back Mendieta as well is he's a very good player. So I was surprised he never really played in Juarez in Mexico. He always seemed to be an unused sub on the bench. But this was a guy that pretty much blew away the league for like 5 seasons, because not just in Olympia, when he was at Libertad, he was also a very exciting attacking midfielder, scored lots of goals. So I think that will really, really help them. I mean, again, we don't know about the Libertadores. It's a very tough ask, but this squad strengthening at least helps you for the league as well. Because we don't know, thinking of Cerro's got a tough task. I think Olympia's got an even harder task. I would put maybe Internacional slightly stronger. Internacional, one thing that's changed is they've got rid of their manager, Miguel Angel Ramirez, I think it was, who was in the group stage. He's now left. So I don't know who's taken over, because I was about to say Scolari, but Scolari took over Gremio. There's a lot of ins and outs of managers. But yeah, I mean, I think from what we saw in previously, Internacional has a really strong team, so it's going to be difficult as well for Olympia.
Diego Aguirre is actually the manager of Inter. So yeah, no, I agree. I think it's going to be a very tight one for both teams. Certainly, they are going to need the results that they need at home to convince when going back to Brazil. As you know, it's hard to play over there in Brazil to win, let alone get results. So we'll see what happens. We'll definitely see what happens, but obviously we wish the best of luck to them. And of course to Libertad as well. We're playing the Sudamericana against Junior. So we'll close it off here, guys, but we do have one more thing to mention. We do want to mention what's been going on in the women's game. It's in full swing, despite everyone focusing on the attention on the men's game in terms of Copa America, the league, Copa Libertadores, that kind of thing. Ralph, if you can provide just a little bit of an update of what's going on. Obviously you've been keeping an eye of how the game's been going on over there in the women's game. So yeah, why don't you just take it away?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, we spoke, so if you guys haven't heard the interview that we did with Cari Vega, she plays for Libertad Limpeño. We did that interview a few weeks ago, and at the time we were saying that they were hoping to get into the semifinals, because the way the regular season ends in the women's league is it ends, and then the top 4 go into a seeded semifinal. So first place 4th, second place 3rd, and then they play the final. And the winner of that is crowned the winner of the Apertura. So in the end, Libertad Limpeño, they did squeeze in, but they didn't make it through the semifinals. The final was between Cerro Porteño, who have been playing really well, and Capiatá, who had a particularly good season with one striker, Ramona Martinez. She ended up being the top scorer in the league. Cerro won it with a very convincing performance. That game, most of the games, unfortunately, we can't watch here in the US or outside of Paraguay, really. That although they're broadcast locally, they're not usually broadcast outside. But the final actually was streamed on YouTube, so we were able to see it. Cerro played very well, picked up that title, and then we saw a very short off season because they've actually just started the Clausura now already. So the Clausura is going to be same format. It's like all a normal league format, and then the top four will do semifinals and final. It started yesterday. Cerro Porteño won 10-0 to start the league season against 12 de Octubre. Again, we were talking with Cari Vega about the professionalization of women's football in Paraguay. And this is one of the issues we have, is that you have teams like Cerro that are really pushing towards it. And then teams like 12 de Octubre, unfortunately, are not taking it as seriously. So that in the off season, most of their players from the Apertura have left because they weren't being paid, or they weren't being paid, kind of adequately for their profession. So that team's almost fell apart in the off season. And then we do have a few big moves that have happened. So Ramona Martinez, who I spoke about, the top scorer for Capiatá, she signed for Olimpia. Olimpia have also picked up Jessica Santa Cruz, she was playing in Europe for a long time. She was playing in Austria for her most recent team. But she's a very experienced player. So with Jessica Santa Cruz and Ramona Martinez, Olimpia, who missed out on those semifinals, are kind of, strengthening and setting themselves up. And then Cerro have strengthened themselves. They brought back Magali Brizuela. Magali Brizuela was at CU here in the US. So she played college football here. Again, or college soccer, maybe I should say. College soccer here in the US, which is the same as, again, with Cari Vega had that experience. We spoke to her. Also to Steffi Schneider that we talked about on here. And then Cerro have another striker called Veronica Kurz, who also played in the US. So it's a very interesting path you're seeing with a lot of these players. They come to the US to get maybe some of that experience, but also, the opportunities of scholarships. But then they're going back to Paraguay to play and to play at that top level. So yeah, it's an exciting tournament. I think you have always Libertad Limpeño up there. Cerro are the champions. Maybe Capiatá will struggle this time, losing their best striker, but watch out for Olimpia that have picked up these two big signings. And I think, Olimpia really want to be up there and kind of start competing, because they're not they're the traditional powerhouse in men's football. They haven't been as much in women's football.
Can we also, Ralph, talk about the big move for Jessica Martinez?
Yeah, good point. So Jessica Martinez, right? She was at Real Madrid and she got the all-important goal on the last day of the season to help them qualify for the Champions League, and then she left, which I was kind of surprised by, thinking, well, they let her go after being an important player. But she's actually staying in Spain, and she's moved to Sevilla. Which I think is great for her, also great for the Paraguay national team, that you're still having these players at some of the top levels, because I mean the Spanish league again is growing, I think, a lot in women's football against some of maybe your more traditional powerhouse. Well, England wasn't always a traditional powerhouse, but the Super League in England now is picking up some big stars, and especially Chelsea, are looking really strong. But then you have France and Germany that have been very big there. But yeah, it's a good signing, and it's nice that she stays in Europe as well, and doesn't sometimes come back, because you see that sometimes, right, with players that have one chance in Europe and then they end up back in South America. They don't always come straight back to Paraguay, but they end up in Brazil or Argentina. But this is great, and she's kind of the big hope, I guess, right, for the national team. And Copa America, the women's Copa America is next year, 2022.
Yeah, a lot of promise, you would say, for the women's game on both those that are playing abroad and obviously those playing in their own country. So a lot to look forward to, and hopefully that it is set on the right path to hopefully, obviously, achieving the good dream that is to qualify for a first ever World Cup. But guys, again, another great conversation as always. We went through everywhere. Went from Copa America, women's game, Libertadores. Another great chat as always. So I think it's a perfect way to close out the show. And so thank you to everyone that's been listening. Obviously, like, subscribe, listen to us on iTunes. Sorry, Apple Podcasts is what's called now. Spotify, and yeah, thank you again for all the continued support that you've given us on Guarani Vision. So for myself, Roberto Rojas, for Ralph, Hannah, and for Maria Britos, thank you so much for listening to this brand new episode of Guarani Vision. See you soon.